Chapter 2. The Curse of the Sun. It is the green parts of the plants of the solid earth and the seas which endlessly operate the appropriation of an important part of the sun's luminous energy. It is in this way that light, the sun, produces us, animates us, and engenders our excess. This excess, this animation, are the effect of the light. We are basically nothing but an effect of the sun. The solar ray that we are recovers in the end its nature and the sense of the sun. It is necessary that it gives itself, loses itself without reckoning. The peoples of ancient Mexico united man with the glory of the universe. The sun was the fruit of a sacrificial madness. There is no philosophical story more famous than that narrated in the 7th book of Plato's Republic, in which Socrates tells Glaucon of a peculiar dream. It begins in the depths of a sort of subterranean cavern in which fettered humans are buried from the sun, their heads constrained to prevent them seeing anything but shadows cast upon a wall by a fire. The ascent through various levels of illusion to the naked light of the sun is the most powerful myth of the philosophical project, but it is also the account of a political struggle in which Socrates anticipates his death. The denizens of the cave violently defend their own benightedness, to such an extent that Socrates asks, if it were possible to lay hands on and to kill the man who tried to release them and lead them up, would they not kill him? Glaucon immediately concurs with this suggestion. Such violence is not unilateral. The philosopher, after all, has an interest in the sun that is not purely a matter of knowledge. To have witnessed the sun is a gain and an entitlement, a supraterrestrial invitation, however reluctantly accepted, to rule. So our cities will be governed by us and you with waking minds, and not, as most cities now, which are inhabited and ruled darkly as in a dream by men who fight one another for shadows and wrangle for office, as if that were a great good, when the truth is that the city in which those who are to rule are least eager to hold office must needs be best administered and most free from dissension, and the state that gets the contrary type of ruler will be the opposite of this. Light, desire, and politics are tangled together in this story, knotted in the darkness. For there is still something Promethean about Socrates, an attempt to extract power from the sun. Bataille says, the eagle is at one and the same time the animal of Zeus and that of Prometheus, which is to say that Prometheus is himself an eagle, Atheus Prometheus, going to steal fire from heaven. To gaze upon the sun directly, without the intervention of screens, reflections, or metaphors, to look upon the sun itself and see its true nature, not by reflections in water or phantasms of it in an alien setting, but in and by itself in its own place, has been the European aspiration most relentlessly harmonized with the valorization of truth. Any aspiration or wish is the reconstruction of a desire, drive, at the level of representation, but the longing for unimpeded vision of the sun is something more, an ideological consolidation of representation as such. The sun is the pure illumination that would be simultaneous with truth, the perfect solidarity of knowing with the real, the identity of exteriority and its manifestation. To contemplate the sun would be the definitive confirmation of enlightenment. Gazing into the golden rage of the sun shreds vision into scraps of light and darkness. A white sun is congealed from patches of light, floating ephemerally at the edge of blindness. This is the illuminating sun, giving what we can keep, the sun whose outpourings are acquired by the body as nutrition, and by the eye as assimilable sensation. Plato's sun is of this kind, a distilled sun, a sun which is the very essence of purity, the metaphor of beauty, truth, and goodness. Throughout the cold months, when nature seems to wither and retreat, one awaits the return of the sun in its full radiance. The bounty of the autumn seems to pay homage to it, as the ancients also did. Mixed with this nourishing radiance, at its very heart, is the other sun, the deeper one, dark and contagious, provoking a howl from Bataille. The sun is black. From this second sun, the sun of malediction, we receive not illumination but disease, For whatever it squanders on us, we are fated to squander in turn. The sensations we drink from the black sun afflict us as ruinous passion, skewering our senses upon the drive to waste ourselves. If, in the final analysis, the sun is the sole object of literary description, this is due less to its illuminative radiance than to its virulence, to the unassimilable fact that the sun is nothing but death. How far from Socrates and his hopes of gain are Bataille's words, "The sickness of being vomits a black sun of spittle." In order to succeed in describing the notion of the sun in the spirit of one who must necessarily emasculate it in consequence of the incapacity of the eyes, one must say that this sun has poetically the sense of mathematical serenity and the elevation of the spirit. In contrast, if, despite everything, one fixes upon it with sufficient obstinacy, it supposes a certain madness, and the notion changes its sense, because, in the light, it is not production that appears, but refuse, le déchet, which is to say, combustion, well enough expressed, psychologically, by the horror which is released from an incandescent arc light. Incandescence is not enlightening, but the indelicate philosophical instrument of presence has atrophied our eyes to such an extent that the dense materiality of light scarcely impinges on our intelligence. Even Plato acknowledges that the impact of light is, at first, pain because of the dazzle and glitter of the light. Phenomenology has systematically erased even this concession, yet it is far from obvious why an absence-presence opposition should be thought the most appropriate grid for registering the impact of intense radiation. It is as if we were still ancient Hellenes, interpreting vision as an outward movement of perception rather than as a subtilized retinal wounding, inflicted by exogenous energies. Everything begins for us with the sun, because, we shall come to see, even the cavern, the labyrinth, has been spawned by it. In a sense, the origin is light, but this must be thought carefully. Our bodies have sucked upon the sun long before we open our eyes, just as our eyes are congealed droplets of the sun before copulating with its outpourings. The flow of dependency is quite clear, lethal. The afflux of solar energy at a critical point of its consequences is humanity. The eye is not an origin, but an expenditure. The first text in the Oeuvre complète is Bataille's earliest published book, The Story of the Eye. It first appeared under the pseudonym of Lord Auch in 1928, which roughly places it amongst a group of early writings, including the Solaranus, 31, Rotten Sun, 30, quoted above, and the posthumously published The Pineal Eye, manuscripts dated variously 27 and 31. The common theme of these writings is the submission of vision to a solar trajectory that escapes it, dashing representational discourse upon a darkness that is inextricable from its own historical aspiration. The story, Histoire of the Eye, is both the story and the history of the eye, as also the pineal eye is a fiction and a history. Every history is a story, which does not mean that the story escapes history, or is anything other than history consummating itself in a blindness which occupies the place of its proper representation. The story of the eye climaxes with the excision of a priest's eye, which is made to slip, glisser, into the vulva of the book's heroine Simone, once by her own hand and once by that of Sir Edmund, an English roué. In this way, the dark thirst, which is the subterranean drive of the sun, obliterates vision, drinking it down into the nocturnal labyrinth of the flesh. Similarly, in the pineal eye, the opening of an eye especially for the sun, appropriate to its ferocious apex at noon, invites an obliteration, blinding and shattering descent. The truth of the sun at the peak of its prodigal glory is the necessity of useless waste, where the celestial and the base conspire in the eclipse of rational moderation. By concluding the movement of ascent that is synonymous with humanity, and providing vision with the verticality that is its due, the pineal eye crowns the epoch of reason, opening directly onto the heavens, where it is instantaneously enucleated by the deluge of searing filth which is the sun's truth. I represented the eye at the summit of the skull to myself as a horrible volcano in eruption, with exactly the murky and comic character which attaches to the rear and its excretions. But the eye is without doubt the symbol of the dazzling sun, and the one I imagined at the summit of my skull was necessarily inflamed, being dedicated to the contemplation of the sun at its maximum burst, éclat. The fecal eye of the sun is also torn from its volcanic entrails, and the pain of a man who tears out his own eyes with his fingers is no more absurd than that anal setting of the sun. The perfect identity between representation and its object, blind sun or blinding sun, it matters little, is thought consistently in these early texts as the direct gaze, an Icarian collapse into the sun, which consummates apprehension only by translating it into the register of the intolerable. In the copulation with the sun, which is no more a gratification than a representation, subject and object fuse at the level of their profound consistency, exhibiting, in blindness, that they were never what they were. The unconscious, like time, is oblivious to contradiction, as Freud argues. There is only the primary process, Bataille's sun, except from the optic of the secondary process, representation, which, at the level of the primary process, is still the primary process. This is a logically unmanageable dazzling, quite useless from the perspective of reason, which seeks to differentiate action on the basis of reality. This libidinal consistency, which must be, alogically the same as the sun, is the thread of Ariadne, tangled in the labyrinth of impure difference. At the beginning of the Solar Anus, Bataille notes that, ever since phrases have circulated in brains absorbed in thought, a total identification has been produced, since each phrase connects one thing to another by means of copulas, and it would all be visibly connected if one could discover in a single glance the line, in all its entirety, left by Ariadne's thread, leading thought through its own labyrinth. All human endeavor is built upon the sun, in the same way that a dam is built upon a river, but that there could be a solar society in a stronger sense, a society whose gaze was fixed upon the death core of the sun, seems at first to be an impossibility. Is it not the precise negation of sociality to respond to the will for glory that exists in us, which would that we live like sons, squandering our goods and our life? Without doubt, any closed social system would obliterate itself if it migrated too far into the searing heart of its solar agitation, unpicking the primary repression of its foundation. It is nevertheless possible for a society to persist at the measure of the sun, on condition that a basic aggressivity displaces its sumptuary furore from itself, so that it washes against its neighbors as an incendiary rage. It is such a tendency that Bataille discovers in the civilization of the Aztecs, whose sacrificial order was perpetuated by means of military violence. In the Accursed Share, his great work of solar sociology, he remarks of the Aztecs that the priests killed their victims upon the top of pyramids. They laid them on a stone altar and stabbed them in the chest with an obsidian knife. They tore out the heart, still beating, and lifted it up to the sun. Most of the victims were prisoners of war, justifying the idea that wars were necessary to the life of the sun. Wars having the sense of consumption, not that of conquest, and the Mexicans thought that, if they ceased, the sun would cease to blaze. What unfolds beneath Bataille's scrutiny cannot be an apology for the Aztecs or even an explanation. What is at stake in his reading of their culture is an economic intimacy, or thread of solar complicity, the pursuit of genealogical lineages that weave all societies onto the savage rootstock of the stars. The raw energy that stabbed the Aztecs into their ferocities is also that which, regulated by the apparatus of an accumulative culture, drives Bataille in his researches. The energetic trajectory that transects and gnaws his entrails is the molten terrain of a dark communion binding him to everything that has ever convulsed upon the earth. It is precisely the senseless horror of Aztec civilization that gives it a peculiar universality, expressing as it does the unavowable source of social impetus. The sun itself was to their eyes the expression of sacrifice, and their energies were dedicated to a carnage without purpose, whereby they realized the truth of the sun upon the earth. It seems to Western eyes as though their hunger for blood were indefensible, based upon ludicrous myths, and exemplifying at the extreme a human capacity to be perverted by untruth. If the culture of the Aztecs had been rooted in an arbitrary mythological vision, such a reading might be sustained, But for Bataille, the thirst for annihilation is the same as the sun. It is not a desire which man directs towards the sun, but the solar trajectory itself, the sun as the unconscious subject of terrestrial history. It is only because of this unsurpassable dominion of the sun that, for the common and uncultivated consciousness, the sun is the image of glory. The sun radiates. Glory is represented as similarly luminous and radiating, such that the analogy of a sacrificial death in the flames to the solar burst is the response of man to the splendor of the universe, since human sacrifice is the acute moment of a contest opposing to the real order and duration the movement of a violence without measure. Belonging alongside sacrifice in Bataille's work is the word expenditure, dépense. This word operates in a network of thought that he describes as general or solar economy, the economics of excess, outlined most fully in the same shaggy and beautiful theoretical work, the Accoucheur, in which he writes, "The radiation of the sun is distinguished by its unilateral character. It loses itself without reckoning, without counterpart. Solar economy is founded upon this principle." It is because the sun squanders itself upon us without return that the sum of energy produced is always superior to that which was necessary to its production, since we are ultimately nothing but an effect of the sun. Excess or surplus always precedes production, work, seriousness, exchange, and lack. Need is never given. It must be constructed out of luxuriance. The primordial task of life is not to produce or survive, but to consume the clogging floods of riches, of energy, pouring down upon it. He states this boldly in his magnificent line, "The world is sick with wealth." Expenditure, or sacrificial consumption, is not an appeal, an exchange, or a negotiation, but an uninhibited wastage that returns energy to its solar trajectory, releasing it back into the movement of dissipation that the terrestrial system, culminating in restricted human economies, momentarily arrests. Voluptuary destruction is the only end of energy, a process of liquidation that can be suspended by the accumulative efforts whose zenith form is that of the capitalist bourgeoisie, but only for a while. For solar economy, excess is the incontestable point of departure, and excess must, in the end, be spent. The momentary refusal to participate in the uninhibited flow of luxuriance is the negative of sovereignty, a servile différance, postponement of the end. The burning passage of energetic dissipation is restrained in the interest of something that is taken to transcend it, a future time, a depredatory class, a moral goal. Energy is put into the service of the future. The end of the employment of a tool always has the same sense as the employment of the tool. A utility is assigned to it in its turn, and so on. The stick digs the earth in order to ensure the growth of a plant. The plant is cultivated to be eaten. It is eaten to maintain the life of the one who cultivated it. The absurdity of an infinite recursion alone justifies the equivalent absurdity of a true end, which does not serve anything.